The August sun lashed the arid lands of Arizona when Sarah Mitchell arrived at the Thompson Ranch. His wagon swayed on the worn-out wheels as the panting horses battled the scorching heat. Red dust clung to her blonde hair and the faded blue dress that was all that was left of her previous life. Sarah had been on the run for 3 weeks from the men of Marcus Kane, the powerful rancher who controlled half of Tombstone County. After witnessing the murder of Deputy Wilson, she knew that her life was no longer worth anything. Kane would leave no witnesses alive. The ranch appeared like a mirage on the horizon, a simple, worn-out wooden building surrounded by empty corrals and a rusty water pump that creaked in the wind. The place seemed abandoned, but Sarah noticed smoke coming out of the chimney. His horses were on the verge of exhaustion. As he stepped out of the wagon, his legs trembled. 3 days of eating only dry biscuits took their toll. Sarah held onto the side of the vehicle, breathing in the hot air that burned her lungs. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the moan of the wind between the loose boards. It was then that the door opened. A boy of approximately 7 years old appeared on the threshold. Her brown hair was unkempt, and her clothes were torn and dirty. But it was her eyes that caught Sarah's attention. Bright blue eyes, full of a pain that no child should carry. Tommy Thompson had lost his mother 2 months ago. Typhoid fever took her on a stormy night, leaving only him and his widowed father on a ranch that looked more like a cemetery. The father, devastated by the loss, could barely take care of himself. Tommy spent his days alone, dreaming that one day his mother would return. The boy ran across the dusty courtyard with the speed of a frightened rabbit, his bare feet kicking up small clouds of earth. Sarah remained motionless, confused by the child's reaction. When Tommy reached her, he stopped abruptly and raised his eyes, which now shone with desperate hope. There was a woman, a real woman with golden hair like the rays of sunlight that her mother used to caress before going to sleep. Tommy held out his small hands, trembling with excitement. To him, that stranger was an angel sent from heaven. The ranch held dark secrets. 3 months earlier, John Thompson found out that Kane wanted his land. The creek that ran through the property was the only source of fresh water for miles, and Kane needed it for his cattle empire. John turned down all offers, even when they became threats. After his wife died, John fell into a deep depression. He stopped taking care of the cattle, let the fields dry up, and started drinking to forget the pain. Tommy has become a lost soul in an adult world too cruel for a child. Sarah looked around and noticed signs of abandonment, rusty tools thrown on the ground, loose planks on the fences, weeds growing where there was once a garden. The place breathed sadness, but it also emanated a strange sense of fate. The wind changed direction, bringing the distant sound of horses' hooves. Sarah felt a shiver run down her spine. I knew this sound very well. Kane's men rode in groups, always in military formation, always with deadly purpose. She bent down and looked into the boy's eyes. Tommy stared at her with disturbing intensity, as if he could see through her soul. The child held out her little hands toward her, and Sarah noticed that they trembled with hope. The sound of hooves grew closer, echoing through the barren hills like war drums. Panic gripped Sarah when she recognized the rhythm of Kane's henchman's ride. She grabbed Tommy by the shoulders and pushed him toward the house while his eyes scoured the grounds desperately for where to hide the wagon. There was no time. Tommy guided Sarah through the front door, his quick footsteps echoing off the worn floorboards. The house was plunged into darkness, with closed curtains and dust-covered furniture. The musty smell mingled with the acrid aroma of spilled liquor. Empty bottles littered the floor, telling the story of one man's despair. From the back room came a loud, jagged rumble. John Thompson slept the heavy sleep of those who drink to forget. Sarah followed Tommy through the messy kitchen, where dirty dishes piled up and flies circulated spoiled food scraps. The child seemed used to that scenario of neglect. The horseman stopped in the courtyard. Through the cracks in the curtains, Sarah counted 6 men. He immediately recognized the leader, Jake Morrison, Kane's right-hand man, a tall, thin man with scars on his face and eyes as cold as winter ice. Morrison had a reputation for never failing a hunt. Tommy pointed to a door at the back of the house. Sarah understood and followed him to a small basement dug into the earth, used to store preserves. The space was cramped and humid, but it protected them from prying eyes. They descended a makeshift staircase that creaked with every step. In the basement, between bags of withered potatoes and rusty cans, Tommy cowered next to Sarah. The woman felt the fear radiating from the child's small body, but she also perceived a surprising courage. The boy did not cry. He just waited with the patience of someone who has faced many difficult moments. Upstairs, Morrison's men began knocking on the door. The noise was loud and insistent, designed to wake up even the dead. Sarah heard John stumble across the room, grumbling as he searched for his boots. The door squeaked open. Morrison wasted no time with courtesies. He wanted to know if John had seen a woman pass by, a blonde woman traveling alone in a cart pulled by 2 bay horses. John, still dazed by drinking, denied seeing any women. Sarah held her breath when she heard heavy footsteps walking through the house. The men were searching every room, moving furniture, opening cabinets, looking for any sign of his presence. One of the henchmen passed right over the basement, his boots making the ceiling groan. Tommy moved closer to Sarah, and she felt the child's small hand reach for hers in the dark. The boy's fingers were cold, but his grip was firm. Sarah realized that despite her fear, Tommy was trying to console her. A 7-year-old child trying to give strength to a terrified adult woman. Morrison questioned John about his lands again. The drunken farmer repeated that he had no interest in selling. Morrison laughed disdainfully and reminded John that men alone didn't last long in those lands, especially men who drank too much and neglected their duties. The sound of boots approached the kitchen. Sarah heard one of the men comment on the dirty dishes and empty bottles. Morrison sent the men to search the barn and the corrals, but he also ordered them to check every corner of the house. The basement door was hidden behind a cabinet in the kitchen. Sarah prayed that the men wouldn't find her, but she knew Morrison was thorough. He would leave no stone unturned until he found what he was looking for. Tommy squeezed Sarah's hand tighter, and she realized that the boy had closed his eyes. The child moved his lips in silence, as if he were praying. Sarah closed her eyes too, bracing herself for the worst. The closet creaked as it was moved, and sunlight penetrated the basement like a sharp blade cutting through the darkness. Sunlight penetrated the basement as the closet was washed away. Sarah cowered against the wall of dirt, pulling Tommy closer. For a terrible moment, he thought that all was lost. But then he heard John Thompson's voice, louder and firmer than before. The farmer was arguing with Morrison over property rights. His voice echoed through the house, clearly directing the intruder's attention away from the kitchen. John talked about lawyers, about legal documents, about how Cain couldn't take land from honest people. It was a desperate strategy, but it worked. The henchman who discovered the door hesitated. Morrison shouted from the room, ordering everyone to gather for a new search of the surroundings. The man left the door ajar and ran to answer the call. Sarah and Tommy remained motionless, barely daring to breathe. For the next few minutes they heard the men searching the barn, the empty corrals, and the fields around the house. Morrison was visibly angry. His men had followed the trail of the wagon there, but now the trail seemed to have disappeared. Tommy whispered in Sarah's ear that he knew another way. He pointed to the bottom of the small space, where a barely visible opening led to a narrow tunnel. The boy explained in whispers that his father had dug that passage years earlier, during a dispute with other farmers. It was a secret route that led to the stream. Sarah hesitated. The tunnel looked dangerous, and she didn't know if it could fit in it. But up there, Morrison was losing his temper. She heard the man threaten John, saying that he would come back with more men, and that next time he would not be so polite. The boy went ahead, crawling through the narrow tunnel with the agility of someone who had used it before. Sarah followed, battling the panic of claustrophobia. Damp earth clung to his clothes, and sharp rocks scratched his hands and knees. The air was thin and laden with the smell of rotting roots. After what seemed like hours, Sarah saw a point of light ahead. The tunnel ended in an opening covered by bushes, on the banks of the stream that cut through the property. Tommy came out first and helped Sarah emerge from the hole. The stream flowed gently between smooth rocks and weeping willows. The water was crystal clear and cool, a stark contrast to the scorching heat of the desert. Sarah knelt on the bank and drank greedily, feeling the life return to her dehydrated body. Tommy did the same, but his eyes remained alert. Distant voices came from the ranch. Morrison and his men were still looking for clues, but Sarah knew they would soon leave. They couldn't waste much time in one place, not when Cain expected quick results. Sarah looked at Tommy and saw in the boy's eyes a silent plea. The child did not want her to leave. Tommy had found someone to pin his hopes on, someone who could perhaps fill the void left by his dead mother. But Sarah knew that staying meant putting the child in danger. Tommy pointed to the wagon, which was still in the ranch yard. The horses had been watered by Morrison's men, who probably thought they belonged to John. Sarah realized that she had an opportunity to retrieve her animals and continue the escape. But when she turned to say goodbye to Tommy, she found the boy crying silently. Tears ran down the child's dirty cheeks, leaving clean traces in the accumulated dust. It was the first time Tommy had cried since his mother died, as if Sarah's presence had stirred up buried feelings. Tommy reached out to Sarah, and in it was a small faded picture. The image showed a young woman with brown hair and a gentle smile, holding a baby in her arms. Tommy's mother. The boy offered his most precious memory to the stranger, who had appeared as an angel in his lonely life. The voices on the ranch grew more distant. Morrison and his men were leaving, but Sarah knew they would return. Kane never gave up on a hunt. She was faced with a choice that would change not only her fate, but also that of a child who had already lost too much. The decision came like a bolt of lightning amid the storm of emotions in Sarah's chest. She couldn't abandon Tommy. Not after seeing the despair in the child's eyes. Not after feeling the little hand trembling in his during the terror in the basement. There was something about that boy that awakened a maternal instinct that she thought she had lost forever. Sarah put the photo in her dress pocket and held Tommy's face in her hands. The boy stopped crying and looked at her with hope so intense that it broke the woman's heart. At that moment, she made a silent promise. She would protect that child, even if it meant facing Kane and his entire army. The first step was to recover the cart. Sarah left Tommy hidden among the willows and snuck back to the ranch. Morrison and his men were gone, leaving only trails of dust and the echo of threats. John Thompson was sitting on the porch, a bottle in his hand and his gaze lost on the horizon. As Sarah approached, John looked at her unsurprised, as if he knew she had been there the whole time. The farmer had aged 10 years in recent months. His grey hair was disheveled. His unshaven beard covered a face marked by sadness. It was the image of a man defeated by life. Sarah explained her situation in a few words. She said she was a witness against Kane and needed help to escape alive. John listened in silence, shaking his head, as if not surprised by another victim of the powerful farmer. John said Kane had wanted his land for months. The creek was strategic to the expansion plans, and John was the only obstacle standing between Kane and total control of the region. After his wife died, John lost the will to fight, but he still refused to sell. It was a matter of honor, he said, taking another sip. Tommy appeared running through the courtyard, having disobeyed Sarah's instructions. The boy hugged the woman's legs and looked at his father with an expression that mixed love and disappointment. John looked away, unable to look at the son he had neglected. The situation at the ranch was worse than Sarah imagined. There was no food in the house. The cattle had been sold to pay off debts, and John spent the little money he had left on drink. Tommy survived by collecting eggs from the few chickens left and drinking milk from an old cow. Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She proposed a deal to John. She would stay at the ranch for a few weeks, take care of Tommy, and help get the property in order. In return, John would stop drinking and go back to being the father his son needed. It was risky, but Sarah saw no other alternative. John laughed bitterly at the proposal. He said that Kane would soon find out where Sarah was hiding, and when that happened, they would all die. It was not worth risking his son's life for a stranger. But Tommy positioned himself between Sarah and his father, crossed his small arms, and looked at John with determination that surprised both adults. The child's courage embarrassed John. For the first time in months, the farmer saw a glimmer of hope in his son's eyes. Tommy believed that Sarah could save his family, and this childlike faith stirred something deep in the heart of the broken man. Sarah seized the moment and painted a picture of what could happen. If John continued drinking, he would lose Tommy to death by negligence. If he sold the land to Kane, he would run out of money in a few months. But if he fought, if he tried to rebuild his life, maybe there would still be hope. The afternoon wind brought the distant sound of horses again. Morrison was coming back, probably with more men. Sarah felt the panic return, but this time there was something different. She was no longer alone. He had Tommy by his side, and perhaps an ally in John Thompson. John got up from his chair, threw the bottle on the floor and smashed it to pieces with the heel of his boot. He looked at his son and then at Sarah, and in his eyes there was a spark that hadn't been there for months. The farmer went into the house and came back with an old but well-maintained Winchester. The horsemen were approaching quickly, and this time they were coming in greater numbers. Sarah counted at least 10 men in the cloud of dust that rose over the horizon. Kane was sending an army to make sure there were no failures. The battle that would define everyone's fate was about to begin. Kane's army arrived like a storm of dust and iron. Morrison led 12 armed men, all with hard faces and scars that told stories of violence. They stopped in a semicircle in front of the house, creating a barrier between the Thompsons and any possible escape. Morrison stepped off his horse with calculated movements, his revolver gleaming in his holster. His eyes swept across the scene, John wielding the Winchester on the porch, Sarah protecting Tommy behind her, and the boy watching it all with impressive courage. The situation was clear to everyone. The leader of the henchmen wasted no time. Kane wanted Sarah alive, but he didn't care what state she got into. As for John and Tommy, they were obstacles that could be removed permanently. Morrison offered one last chance, to hand over the woman in exchange for a quick death for father and son. John spat on the dusty ground and raised his rifle. Her answer echoed through the valley. She would never hand over a helpless woman to men like Kane. Tommy stood in front of Sarah, stretching out his small arms as if he could protect her with his own body. The boy shouted that she was his mother now, and no one would touch her. The child's words touched something deep in Sarah's heart. In that moment, she understood that Tommy wasn't just a lonely boy seeking solace. It was a son who chose her, who put all his faith and love in her. Sarah knelt down and hugged the boy, whispering that she loved him too. Morrison lost his temper. He signaled to his men, who began to spread out across the courtyard, looking for positions for the confrontation. Some hid behind Sarah's wagon, others used the pens as cover. The Thompson home became the center of a deadly siege. The first shot came from John. The Winchester roared and one of the henchmen fell off his horse, hit in the chest. The sound echoed through the hills like thunder, marking the beginning of an unequal battle. Morrison and his men responded with a hail of bullets that they plunged into the wood of the house. Sarah pushed Tommy into the house and ran to the kitchen, where John was storing extra ammunition. The boy followed her, refusing to part with the woman he now considered his mother. Together, they carried boxes of shells for John, who kept firing from the balcony with deadly accuracy. The battle lasted for hours. John knew every inch of his property and used this advantage to thwart the raiders' attacks. He would shoot from a window, then run to another position, keeping the henchmen confused. Sarah quickly learned how to reload the Winchester and even how to shoot. Tommy showed impressive courage. The boy crawled around the house carrying ammunition and water for the adults, always attentive to the movements of the enemies. At one point, he warned about 2 henchmen who were trying to break into the back, allowing Sarah to surprise them. As the afternoon progressed, the situation became desperate. John was grazed on the arm, Sarah was almost out of ammunition, and Tommy was beginning to show signs of exhaustion. Morrison had lost 4 men and his patience was at its limit. The leader of the henchmen decided to change his strategy. He ordered his men to set fire to the barn, creating a smokescreen that allowed them to approach the house. The acrid smell of burning wood filled the air, and Sarah realized that they would soon be surrounded by flames. It was then that Tommy remembered the tunnel. The boy pulled Sarah by the hand and pointed to the basement, explaining that they could escape through the secret passage. But Sarah looked at John, wounded and determined to defend his property, and made a decision that surprised everyone. Sarah took the last box of cartridges and put it in John's hands. He said he was going to use the tunnel not to escape, but to attack Morrison from behind. It was a suicidal plan, but perhaps it was the only chance to save Tommy and give John a chance to survive. Tommy refused to let Sarah leave alone. The boy clung to her tightly, crying and begging not to be abandoned again. Sarah knelt down and looked into the child's blue eyes, promising that she would return. He took the picture of Tommy's mother out of his pocket and returned it, saying that the boy's real mother would always be in his heart. Sarah emerged from the tunnel among the willows like a deadly shadow. In his hands, he carried John's pistol and only 6 bullets. Morrison stood behind the wagon, shouting orders for his henchmen to move forward. The man had lost his composure, frustrated by the unexpected resistance. Sarah positioned herself behind a rock 20 yards from Morrison. He had a clear vision of the leader, but he knew he would have only one chance. If she missed the first shot, she would be killed before she could shoot again. Sarah took a deep breath, took careful aim, and pulled the trigger. The bullet hit Morrison in the shoulder, causing him to spin and fall. The man screamed in pain, alerting his companions to the new threat. 2 henchmen ran toward the stream, but Sarah had already changed position, crawling to another shelter. The final battle lasted only minutes. Sarah used every tree, every stone, to confuse the attackers. His shots were accurate and deadly, taking out one henchman after another. Morrison, wounded and furious, ordered the remaining men to burn down the house. It was Tommy who turned the tide of the battle. The boy spotted Morrison trying to get around the house from the back and alerted Sarah with a scream. The woman turned quickly and found the leader of the henchmen a few meters away, pointing his revolver at her. Sarah pulled the trigger a split second before Morrison. The bullet hit the henchman in the chest, knocking him backwards. Morrison's shot grazed Sarah's ear, so close that she felt the heat of the gunpowder. The two remaining henchmen, seeing their leader dead, lost their nerve. They threw their weapons on the ground and raised their hands, shouting that they were surrendering. The battle was over, but the ranch was on fire, and the smoke made the air almost unbreathable. Sarah rushed to the house, where she found John passed out from blood loss and Tommy trying to wake his father. The boy cried and shook John, begging him not to die like his mother. Sarah knelt next to the farmer and checked his injuries. The bullet had gone through his arm without hitting arteries, but he needed urgent care. With Tommy's help, Sarah carried John out of the burning house. The boy ran to the creek and came back with fresh water, helping Sarah clean up his father's wounds. Gradually, John regained consciousness and smiled weakly when he saw his son taking care of him. The fire consumed the barn and part of the house, but the main structure was saved. Sarah organized the two surviving henchmen to help put out the flames, threatening them with the Winchester if they refused. When the sheriff arrived the next day, alerted by the smoke seen from afar, he found a makeshift family tending to the wounded and rebuilding what had been destroyed. Sarah told the whole truth about Kane, presenting evidence that could finally incriminate the farmer. John, still weak but determined, has officially declared his intention to adopt Sarah as a member of the Thompson family. Tommy jumped for joy and hugged his new mother, finally being sure that she would never abandon him again. The child had found not only a mother, but a warrior who would fight to the death to protect him. The following months brought profound changes. John stopped drinking completely and devoted himself to rebuilding with renewed energy. Sarah used her savings to buy new cattle and seeds. Tommy flourished under the loving care of his adoptive mother, regaining childlike joy. Kane was arrested thanks to Sarah's testimony. His henchmen were tried and convicted, and his empire of terror came to an end. The stream has returned to flow freely through the property, irrigating green fields where there was previously parched land. The house was rebuilt, larger and more welcoming, with a special room for Sarah and a large balcony where the family gathered every night to watch the sunset. Tommy grew strong and brave, always remembering the day an angel appeared in his life when he needed it most. Sarah never forgot the boy's words when she arrived at the ranch. Maybe he was right. Perhaps fate had conspired to reunite three lost souls into a family united by love and courage. And on clear nights of the full moon, Sarah would look at Tommy sleeping peacefully and be thankful that he had entered the wrong ranch on that fateful day. You've just had an exciting journey through the Wild West, where motherly love overcame fear and the courage of a child changed everyone's destiny. Tommy found his mother, Sarah discovered his purpose, and John found his reason to live. What lessons does this story awaken in your heart? Share your thoughts on family, courage, and second chances in the comments. Sign up to follow more epic adventures that touch the soul and challenge the human spirit.